For those who are watching on live streaming, my name is Father Mark Brown at St. Charles Anglican Church. This is a class called Anglicanism 101. It's kind of a bunch of different classes put together that I took in seminary on history, liturgy, and some theology. Now, each class in seminary took a year to go through, and we hit the highlights. So this is going to be the thumbnails of the highlights, because I don't think we really want to spend 3 years going through basic Anglicanism. So I'm going to start with history. Why start with history? Because everybody thinks history is boring, but it's very important. Look around our country today. Most folks don't know what's going on. Look at how people could just fall for anything, and they do, and how they don't even know who they are and what they came from. But history tells you who you are. It tells you where you've come from, and it gives you a foundation so you can discern between what is a truth and what is a lie. Now, one of the things we hear as Anglicans all the time is that the Anglican Church began with Henry VIII. Many Anglicans sadly believe that. It's been, I think, as one of Lenin's people said in the 1920s, you tell a lie long enough, people began to believe it's the truth. So did the Anglican Church begin with Henry VIII? Well, let's look at history and start investigating. To understand Anglicanism, you have to go all the way back to the beginning of the church. And who began the church? It was not a person. It was not Brother John who started a church over here. It was not one of the apostles, whether it was Peter. It was not a patriarch. It was Jesus Christ himself. Jesus Christ taught the apostles and the disciples for 3 years, basically their seminary. Once he ascended into heaven, he left a church of about 100 to 125 souls. The parent church, the mother church of all Christendom, resides in Jerusalem. It does not reside in Canterbury, does not reside in Rome, does not reside in any other place but Jerusalem. That is where we all came from. Part of how the word spread, the church grew, was after Jesus ascended, the apostles hung around Jerusalem for a little while. We know that because of the chapter 15 of Acts, the first council of the church. They came together when James made his announcement since he was the bishop of Jerusalem, he called it and he put it together. And they started settling some issues such as, do we have to keep Jewish law? Do all Christians now need to be circumcised? Do we need to eat the way the Jews eat? And the church said no. If you read Luke chapter 10, verses 1 through 24, you will see where 70 disciples were sent out. Now they came back. And after the ascension, they were dispersed back throughout the Roman Empire. Now their names were kept by the church. As a Protestant, I never knew the church kept such records. Growing up as a Baptist, I was always told that I was from the first century church. And as you start studying history, you realize, no, that's not the truth. The church kept their records, not just the Romans, but also our brothers and sisters in the East. The names of the churches of the 70 apostles were kept. It was written down. Two of the earliest, they were written out earlier than this, but the records we have come from 235, and this was from Rome, Hippolytus of Rome, and then St. Dorothus of Tyre from the East. His latest document we have is from 362. And then we have all of the ante-Nicene fathers. These were the fathers before the Council of Nicaea. I have all their works, or the majority of their works, down in my office. So why is that important to know? If you look at it, it looks like just a bunch of weird sounding names we have a hard time pronouncing. All right? But if you look at those names, you'll find something interesting. One of those names was Astrobolus. Now, I went and pulled this. This is from the Orthodox Church, from the Russian Orthodox Church. It's called the Choosing of the 70 Holy Apostles. Now, in the East, they called them the Holy Apostles. In the West, we call them the Disciples. Some of the names are different, but they're the exact same person. You know, we will call him Peter. They would call him in the East. Right. They would call him a different name. Same person. It's like me and my grandmother. We're talking about grandmothers for the class. My grandmother, both of my grandmothers, were born in the early 20th century. When they talked to me, they may call me Mark, or if I knew I was in trouble, they would hear either Mark Ed or Mark Edward. And if I ever heard Mark Edward Brown say a prayer, because Grandma's very upset with you. So we have these names of all the people, of all the apostles, all the disciples, and where they went. The church kept these records in the East and in the West. This is one, like I said, is from the Russian Orthodox Church. You go down to number 28. I highlighted it, you probably can't see it, but I highlighted this gentleman's name as Astrobolus. He is whom the apostle mentions in his epistle to the Romans. Now, when they say the apostle, they're talking about the apostle Paul. He, in Romans 16:10, he's mentioned. He was the bishop of Britannia. And that's what Rome called Britain at the time. So we know a man who knew Jesus became a bishop in Rome. He's listed as the first bishop of Rome. Of England, back then called the Celtic Church. We know he landed in Glastonbury. We have the evidence, not only from the Christian church, but if you don't want to trust it, you don't think the Christian churches could keep up with it, the archaeological evidence from the current country of England, who occupies Glastonbury, shows that there were Christians in Glastonbury well before the Romans' invasion of 42 AD. So before the Romans ever occupied Britain, or modern day England, there were already Christians in England. Besides this list, we have, the early church affirms it by the writings of the Venerable Bede, who was an early historian, Eusebius, the church historian, he wrote in the 4th century, and if I get my fingers to work here, I'm having some issues since I had this is just a partial list of the church fathers who talk about Christianity in England. They will talk and tell you all sorts of things. Tertullian will tell you that the extremities of Spain, the various parts of Gaul, the regions of Britain that have never been penetrated by Roman arms have received the religion of Christ. Eusebius writes, the apostles passed beyond the ocean to the isles called the Britain Isles. You have Theodore the Blessed of Syria. Paul, liberated from his first captivity in Rome, preached the gospel to the Britons and the others in the West. Our fishermen and publicans not only persuaded the Romans and their tributaries to acknowledge the crucified and his laws, but the Britons also, and the Welsh. And I can just keep going on and on about them. One of the early heretics, Sabellius, he was also a priest in the church. He was excommunicated in 2022 for his Christology. But he said this. He said, the first nation that proclaimed the Christian faith as its religion and called itself Christian after the name of Christ was Britain. One of the first heresies that plagued the church, sadly, came from a monk named Pelagius, otherwise known as Morgan, Britain, Pelagianism. We have Gildas Sapiens, who wrote The Destruction of Britain, and he is a source used for Bede and other secular historians, and I'll get to that in just a second. But he wrote this in The Destruction of Britain. Christ, the true Son, afforded his light, the knowledge of his precepts, to our island in the last year, as we know, of Tiberius Caesar. That doesn't help us because the ancients kept time differently than we did, so you have to go look it up. The last year of the reign of Caesar Tiberius, or Tiberius Caesar, was 37 AD, 4 years after the crucifixion. The church was acknowledging that Christian faith had arrived in England. Now, why is Gildas, somebody we never hear of, so important? How many of you have heard of King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table? Everybody has, right? Do you know why you know about him? Because of Gildas. Gildas is the one who wrote about his 12 battles. Gildas is the one who told us that he wasn't a king. He was basically a warlord, a general who went around after the Roman Empire crumbled, and he fought for the various kings in what is modern-day England. His name was Artorius Romanus. He was a Roman of British birth. Now, the Merlin, Guinevere, Knights of the Round Table, those are all added during the medieval times. None of that happened. But the 12 battles of Arthur that we know about were listed in Gildas. And people were able to know about him and understand him because of Gildas. He's the oldest reference to Arthur that I know about. Rome, our brothers in Rome would tell us that traditionally St. Peter founded the Roman Church in 54 AD. Well, if that's the case, that's 17 years after Aristobulus came to England. We know that the Roman Catholic synods of 1407, 1417 in Pisa, Sens in 1418, Constance in 1419, they all settled an argument between Rome, Gaul, which is modern-day France, Spain, and the Church in England. All of those synods I just talked about affirm that the Anglican Church is the oldest church. Okay? Now, it's not older than the church in Rome, in Jerusalem. It's the oldest of the Western churches. Okay? So how did we get this idea that we came from Rome? 596, St. Augustine arrived from Rome. Now, who was Augustine? Augustine was a monk in a monastery, happy to be there, but he was taken out of the monastery by Pope Gregory I. He was made a deacon and a priest. Then he was sent to the Bishop Arles in Gaul. And Gregory wanted that bishop to make Augustine a bishop, consecrate him a bishop, to send him to England. That bishop didn't want to do it because Gregory knew he was wrong. Both bishops knew they were wrong in what they were doing. The Council of the Churches in Nicaea and elsewhere had already determined, hundreds of years before, that a bishop could not consecrate or ordain a priest for another diocese. So I could not go, if I went, say, to, Diocese of California, and say, hey, and they made me a bishop, and they sent me back to Alabama, the bishops of Alabama would go, no, it's not going to happen. Okay? That is what the church has taught from the beginning. Augustine walked into that blindly. He had no idea. He was just a monk. So Rome already knew there was a church in England. How do you know this? Rome says the first bishop after Peter was Linus. In the Apostolic Constitution, Peter affirms that Linus was born in Wales. Constantine I was born in York, present-day York, England. These were all in the 3rd century, 300 years before Gregory. We already knew. St. Patrick, everybody thinks he's Irish. He's not. He was a Welshman. He came from England. Columbia, he went to the Scots. David for Wales. Aidan went to the Picts. Cuthbert, Boniface, all of them went to Germany. There were Anglican monasteries in Rome long before Augustine came to England. The Council of Arles in 314, we know British bishops attended. We even know their names and where they were from. Eborius of York and Adelphius of Lincoln. We know this from this Latin name, if I can get it out, Nomina Episcopatoria, the list of the names of the bishops who attended. We know they were at Council of Nicaea in 327 because the Church of England still has their expense reports. Okay. Constantine I, I said, who legalized Christianity in 312, who was from York, England. His mother, St. Helena, is the one who gave us the holy sites in the Holy Land. They were always there. She's just the one that initiated to let us know exactly who they were. I referenced this book. This is The Celtic Way of Evangelism by George Hunter. It talks about how St. Patrick converted Ireland. 400 churches in 40 years, where he came from, how he did it, and what he did. And he also talked about the way the Celtic church, what we call the Anglican church today, used to do missions spread the gospel. Totally different from what they would see with Rome, and that they were in Scandinavia, Germany, and Ireland, and in Italy. Now, Augustine started figuring something was up when the Archbishop of Caerleon appeared at his doorstep. Now, why is that important? This was the Archbishop of the seat of David. There was not an Archbishop of Canterbury at this time. The power of the church rested at the seat of David, which is in Wales. He arrived and he asked Augustine, "What are you doing here?" Augustine immediately wrote his 14 sentences to Gregory. These are 14 questions. Number 7 asked Pope Gregory about Augustine's, what is my relationship to the established church in Wales and the other kingdom? There was no England at this time. It was with Umbria, Wessex, Essex, and others. He was in Kent. Kent had been conquered by the pagan Saxons, and they had not totally reconquered the kingdom. But they did have a Christian queen from Gaul. Augustine received a letter back from Gregory, and Gregory affirmed that there was a church there, and that Augustine was in charge of the church. He didn't ask the church in England, he just said, "No, Augustine, I sent you there, you're in charge." Didn't go over too well. That was around 600. By 664, the tension between the two, especially in the political realm, had gotten to the point that the Council of Whitby was called, but it was not called by the church. This was where I think the Anglican Church has made its first mistake. We answered a call by King Oswald of Northumbria. It was a pagan king, not even a Christian king, who called the council. His wife, Rianthemith, was Roman, a Roman Catholic. She could not stand the Celtic Church. Why? Because even at that young, early time, they didn't like it that the Anglicans kept the Eastern Orthodox calendar. We dressed like the Eastern Orthodox. We followed like the Eastern Orthodox. We had the beards. We didn't shave the top of our heads. Most Romans were beardless. She didn't like that. We didn't celebrate Easter at the right time. We also didn't have as many statues. We had a lot more icons. Now, it goes to reason. Our first bishop was from the East. Where's our tradition is going to come from? From the East. That's why you see in Anglican churches today, you'll see a mixture of a statue or an icon, sometimes equally and sometimes one more than the other. The king listened to everybody, and he declared that the Celtic Church would follow Rome. This was written out by the Venerable Bede, the historian. The bishops of the church in England, or the Celtic Church, refused. And then they faced persecution, imprisonment, and exile. Rome, using a pagan king, stole the church. It's harsh to say, but that is exactly what happened. So what was our relationship with Rome until the Reformation? Everybody thinks it was really nice until that old mean Henry VIII showed up. Our relationship with Rome was never good. Regardless of what our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters say, it was never good. At the Council of Hertford in 673, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Theodore, began what we call the Anglican tradition of ignoring Rome. Yeah, some of y'all like that, I know. When Winfrid of York, the bishop of York, opposed the breakup of his diocese, it had gotten too big, and he got paid from all this huge diocese, so he was making a pretty good amount of money. Theodore wanted to break it up because smaller dioceses are easier to control, easier to oversee, easier to give pastoral ministry to. He didn't like that, so he picked up and went to Rome. He got a papal bull. He came back. He gave that papal bull to Theodore. Theodore read it. Everybody thinks Martin Luther was the first person to burn a papal bull. No, it was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Theodore, who burned the papal bull, defrocked Wilfrid, and threw him in prison. Why? He violated the canons of the councils. He went to a foreign bishop. Rome had no power in England. Go forward a few hundred years to William the Conqueror. We all know in 1066 he invaded and conquered England. What most people don't know is he was financed by Gregory VII. He was to return England to Roman control. England, even at this time, was called the Dowry of Mary, which saddens me that so many Anglicans today don't know that. They don't want to have any kind of, they act like, just to be blunt, Baptists when it comes to Mary. Anglicans have always had an affinity, a love for the Blessed Mother. One of the first apparitions, valid apparitions of Mary, is Our Lady of Walsingham, where she told the Lady of Walsingham, the noble lady, to build a church in Walsingham after the Church of the Sepulchre. So people who couldn't go to the Middle East could come here. That church, though destroyed by Henry VIII, has been rebuilt, and today is the only shrine that I know of that has Orthodox, Anglican, and Roman Catholic churches at it in England, because it's run by the Anglicans. We allow the other churches to come in. That's one of the first apparitions, approved apparitions of Mary. Getting back to William, after he conquered everything, and after he'd replaced all the Anglican or Celtic church leadership, all the secular Saxon leaders, William recognized there's an Anglican tradition that he wanted to keep. This is on the outline of the English Reformation. This book is very old. As you can tell, I'm taping it together to keep it there. And here's what was written. As soon as William was safely settled in his new throne, Pope Gregory VII called upon him to pay homage to him, the Pope, and to pay up certain arrears in Peter's pence. William's reply is significant. To do homage, I refuse, because I never promised it, nor do I find that my predecessors ever did it. The money shall be more regularly paid. He further decreed that no orders of the Pope were to be enforced without his approval, that no church laws were to be promulgated without his consent, and even debated without his license, and that none of the nobility were to be placed under any ecclesiastical censor without his permission. Basically, eliminate any power the Pope had in England. William Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 1200s, he was sent by Innocent III to become a pope there. The Archbishop of Canterbury. He was sent by Innocent III to enforce Roman law. Innocent was upset about the Magna Carta, where the Roman nobles and the churches had its influence, lessening the power of the king. The Magna Carta was one of the first documents in the West that started lessening the power of kings. Innocent III didn't like that. He actually excommunicated everybody who took part in the Magna Carta. And William Langton was sent there to enforce that and to enforce Innocent's rule. Once he arrived, he looked around and saw what the tradition was, and he refused to knuckle under. And when the Pope interdicted all sacraments, and interdicting all sacraments means you cannot have Mass, you cannot get a Christian burial, you cannot get confession, you cannot, nothing, none of the sacraments. The Pope did that to England. He interdicted all the sacraments. The Archbishop of Canterbury ignored him and decreed the Pope had not the authority to deny the sacraments in the British Isles. So that was how our relationship with Rome was. You can see it's a constant back and forth. We're not really getting along. So then we get to Henry VIII. But to get to Henry VIII and understand him, you got to go to his dad, Henry VII. The War of the Roses was a civil war between the House of Lancaster and the House of York, because there was no heir to the king who had died in 1455. 1455 to 1487, there was a bloody civil war. Henry VII finally won it on Bosworth Field. Henry VII and Isabel and Ferdinand of Spain, yes, the ones about Columbus, had an alliance. Henry's son Arthur and Catherine, the son of Isabel and Ferdinand, were married, but sadly Arthur died in 1504. They wanted to keep the alliance. So Henry and Ferdinand decided, let's keep this alliance going. How can we do that? We can't let Henry marry Catherine. It's against Scripture and it's against canon law at the time. You couldn't marry your sister-in-law. So Henry VII appealed to Julius II, Pope Julius II, to give a special dispensation. In church talk, that is, he gave him enough money and a bribe. Okay? Now Julius II was a pope that gave us Michelangelo and the beautiful cathedrals you see in Rome. He also thought he was a secular king. If you ever watched the movie Martin Luther, when Luther goes to Rome, there's this guy, here comes the Pope, you see this guy riding by in full gold-plated armor, carrying a mace. That was Julius. He had just arrived back from sacking, I think it was Venice. Why? Because Venice wouldn't do what he said. He gave special permission to do that. Henry VII dies, Henry VIII becomes king. He hated the Continental Reformation. He did not like Luther, he did not like Calvin, none of those that were starting. He wasn't alive with Calvin, but he didn't like any of them. He wrote against Luther in the defense of the sacraments. King Charles III today carries the title Defender of the Faith. It was given to Henry VIII by Leo X, Pope, in the 1520s. Henry remained Catholic his entire life. He died a Catholic. He did not die a Protestant. He did not want a divorce from Catherine. He wanted an annulment, that it was never a legal marriage. There was no male heirs. Medicine back then told everybody women decided the sex of the child. So if you're not having male children, it's your wife's fault, and kings would get rid of their wives. Now, Henry knew he could have children. He knew he could have male children. How did he know that? His mistresses were giving birth to female and male children. Henry, cannot defend most of what he does because he was a king, and kings acted like that in the 1500s. The reason the church and Henry stated there were no male heirs was the curse of God from Leviticus about no children. So Archbishop Cranmer said, get an annulment from Pope Clement VIII. Margaret of Scotland and Philip of France had just gotten annulments for lesser reasons. They just wanted new spouses. So they sent their package in, and the Pope refused. Why? Like I said, remember, they like to be in the secular world. That Pope, Clement VIII, had gotten involved in a war between France and Austria. He backed France. He sent his army to fight with France. He lost. Rome was sacked. Yes, the good Roman Catholic Austrians sacked Rome. Pope was a prisoner of Charles, the Archduke of Austria, in the castle St. Angelo up in the Alps. Why is that important? Charles, not only was he the Duke of Austria, he was Charles V, King, Holy Roman Emperor, the King of the Netherlands, of Spain, and the nephew of Catherine. He saw the petition, and he told the Pope no. And since the Pope was a prisoner of Charles, he said no. Henry reacted like any leader at that time. Probably, even if King Charles III today was told no, he would probably react in a similar fashion. He reacted like a toddler when he's told no. Cranmer held a synod of bishops, and the bishops in England approved it, but that didn't satisfy Henry. Excuse me. He went through and started destroying monasteries, shrines, Our Lady of Walsingham. He even killed St. Robert More, one of the great legal minds of England at the time, because he would not say that Henry was the head of the church in England, the governor of the church in England. Now, before you think, oh, he stood for Christ as the head, Robert More was like, no, the Pope's the head. So Henry killed him because he wouldn't affirm him, because he was still affirming the Pope. Henry continued throughout his days to keep all the reformers in bay, meaning he kept them out of England. When he died, they saw their chance. His son Edward took over. Edward was only 9 years old. He died by the time he was 15. During his reign, Cranmer and others like Cromwell brought in the Presbyterians, began changing the church. You did not want to be in the Church of England at this time. It was total confusion. You had the 10 articles, the 11 articles, 42 articles, 39 articles. The 1549 prayer book, 1550 prayer book, 1555 prayer book, the Solemn Rite. You show up to church, you never knew what you were going to do. The poor priests and the poor people were just thrown into theological confusion, which continues to today in Anglicanism, sad to say. The new Anglican church formed in America, the ACNA, they have 6 prayer books they can choose from. 6. We have 1, and a little missile thrown in. But 6. Which ones can they use? 1662. the 1928 that we use, the 1979 the Episcopalians use, the 2007 that the Reformed Episcopal Church can use. I think the new one the ACNA came out with 2019. And then I just found out that some of the parishes in the north part of Alabama use common worship out of England. So that's 6. Nobody in the ACNA is on the same theological page. Now, in our jurisdiction, and a lot of the jurisdictions what we call the continuing Anglican Church, you can go from here to California to wherever else, and guess what? They're using the 28, and they're using the 40 hymnal. You might find one or two that's using more missal than anything else. Like we use a little bit of the missal, the introit and all that. But that confusion you see in Anglicanism was because of Cranmer. And I know some Anglicans listening to that right now just about bit their tongue when I said something bad about Cranmer. The next monarch was Queen Mary. She was a sister of Edward, and she gets a bad rap. Okay, right now, heads are exploding or listening to this who are Anglicans because Queen Mary is Bloody Mary. She's a horrible, terrible person, which is good propaganda for the Puritans, especially basically the Fox Book of Martyrs. Yes, she was a Roman Catholic. Yes, she put the Anglican Church back under the orbit of Rome. Her husband was Spanish. His name was Philip. She did have Cranmer, Latimer, and Ridley executed. Famous quote from Latimer to Ridley: "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England that as I trust shall never be put out." Does she deserve Bloody Mary? Well, she didn't act any different than any other king or queen in Europe. She got rid of those who opposed her throne. Okay? The Spanish kings, the other Catholic kings did all the same. Popes did it. Alexander IV. They can't prove it, but they think he had his predecessor murdered so he could become pope. So, you know, you can't jump on Mary if you're not going to jump on every monarch and pope at the same time. Now, here's an interesting thing. Rome today says, and I know Ray got an email from somebody questioning Anglican orders because of what happened in the 1890s, which we'll get to. When Cranmer was killed, the Pope sent the Archbishop of Canterbury a new one named Poole. His job was to review all of the ordinations that had happened since Henry broke with Rome, and to give the findings to Rome. He reviewed all the ordinations, deacon, priest, and bishop. About a dozen priests were defrocked, not for theological reasons, because they refused to divorce their wives. The rest of the priests, deacons, and bishops had valid orders. Pope Julius III in 1553 issued the papal bull, Per Clara Charismia, and in 1555, Pope Paul IV issued the papal bull, Regimini Universalis. Both of these popes declared Anglican orders are valid. Remember this when we get to the 1890s. Who replaced Mary when she died? Elizabeth I, sometimes known as Good Queen Bess. Her mother was Anne Boleyn, the second wife. Now this was a time of great confusion. Are we Catholic? Are we Protestant? Which prayer book? Sorrow Mass, Trinitine Mass, prayer book. Both Catholics and Puritans were causing problems in England. Both were demanding a return to the extremes. Queen Elizabeth wanted to go a center road, kind of pacify everybody. In 1569, Catholic noblemen rebelled in Northumberland, Westmoreland, at the behest of Pope Pius V. They attempted to kidnap Queen Elizabeth, kill her, and install her cousin, Mary, a different Mary. They did not win, and unfortunately only Mary had her head chopped off. The nobles did not. In 1570, papal bull Regianus and Excelsius excommunicated Queen Elizabeth, and all of her followers called upon all Catholics to rise up against the Queen. She is not your lawful queen. She rules against Scripture and law. The Jesuits acted as an agent. The rebellion failed. This time, Westmoreland and Northumberland, the other Catholic nobles, lost their heads over this. The Jesuits were then banned from England, and our Roman Catholic friends will say this is how we persecuted them. They failed to realize what the Jesuits were doing and what the other Catholic priests were doing, acting as agents of a foreign power, so eventually they were all banned also. 1558, we all know about the Spanish Armada, right? Who knows about the 1590 and 1594 Spanish Armadas against England by Spain? We don't. They were much smaller. They all three failed. All three of them were paid for, or helped to be paid for, by Rome. Guy Fawkes is still a day celebrated in England. Guy Fawkes Day. That is the day Guy Fawkes tried to blow up Parliament, kill all of the parliamentarians, and King James I. He was a Roman Catholic. He was actually caught as he was lighting the fuse by the soldiers. That is when the Roman Catholic Church was finally suppressed. And they were suppressed until the 1820s. They were second-class citizens in Europe and even in America. It was not until after the American Revolution. If you look at the maps for like New York City, pre-Revolution, after, you'll see churches listed, but none of them were Roman Catholic. As soon as we got our independence, all the Roman Catholic churches, we weren't suddenly inundated by Roman Catholics. They were always here. They were just finally allowed in the English-speaking world to actually put their churches on a map. That's how suppressed they were. They did not get full autonomy again until the 1820s. Now, the Puritans were no better. I call them the Antifa of the 1500s. They destroyed altars, windows, statues, vestments, prayer books, assaulted priests. They wanted a pure church of their own making. I made some folks mad when I was talking about King Charles and his feast day. I said, if the Puritans were alive today, you look around, we don't have a lot of statues, we don't have a lot of stained glass windows, we're not very Catholic looking. But if the Puritans of this time period walked into here, they would break our altar, they would shatter our windows, they would pull down the cross, they would pull the lights out, they would destroy this altar, they would tear down the stations of the cross. They would burn my vestments, they would go through and put out all of the prayer books and burn them. It's a famous picture of Charles I when he's taken into to be buried in the church is shown as destroyed because Cromwell and his Puritans had destroyed it. They wanted a pure church. They wanted to create the ancient church, what I grew up hearing in the Baptist church, that we are a first century church. You look at the first century church, no, you're not. The first century church had the sacraments. Puritans wanted to do away with them. They said anybody who's not them is going to hell. It means exactly like them, going to hell. You could not reason with them, you could not talk to them. Today, if they were in here, when I got out of the pulpit to go back to the altar, a Puritan would come right up behind me and start preaching against everything I said. They did that during Mass. They did it to Hooker. They did it to Law. They did it to all of the divines. They did it to any priest they could do it to. They would preach against the church and the state. Elizabeth did not give in to them. She didn't like them. When she died, James I became king. He despised them. He was the king of Scotland prior to becoming the king of England. He was king in both countries. They actually stopped his carriage on the way to London when he was to be crowned. The Puritans stopped the king. They had a list of demands. They told him, get rid of the bishops. No more bishops. No more sacraments. No more prayer books. We're going to be like the Presbyterians, like Calvin. James refused. Like I said, he despised him. Why? Because he had watched a man named John Knox destroy the church in Scotland. Okay? So he had no like for them. He actually forced the Puritans to the continent. Not all of them, but most. They went to the Calvinist Dutch Netherlands. And even the Calvinist Dutch Netherlands could not stomach them. And after a few years, they kicked them out, and they went back to England. And then James was like, okay, we got to do something. And Jamestown's working. Well, we put one further north, so they put them on a leaky ship called the Mayflower, which had to turn back 2 times because its sprung leaks almost sunk. And they went to what we now call Massachusetts and Plymouth Rock, the Pilgrims that we celebrate. How were they here in America? We have a lot of myth around the Puritans. They destroyed the Indians. Where the Jamestown colonies actually got along with the Indians, the Pilgrims destroyed them, pushed them out. When other Christians would come to the colony, if they did not worship and follow exactly the form of Reformation Calvinism that the Puritans followed, they were imprisoned, they were beaten, they were forced out. The state of Rhode Island was formed by Baptists who were escaping the persecutions of the Puritans. You can go read their history. So there's a lot of turmoil going on. And James I was the quiet before the storm. And he gave us the King James Bible. Now what I'm going to do is stop right here. I mean, that's only about 1,600 years of church history, real quick. But is there any questions you may have about anything I've said? And if that's something I'm going to cover in the future, I'll tell you. But if any questions about anything, if you want to know where I got some information from, just let me know. I know I threw a lot at you, 1,600 years of history. And believe me, in seminary, you would get a year, and you just get the highlights of the history. So I know I felt it was like trying to drink water from a fire hose. So any questions? Any comments? Okay. This next Sunday, we don't have a vestry meeting, right? No, next Sunday, we'll do it again. I'm trying to keep it to about 30 minutes, no more than 40. Keep everyone's interest. Me, I can go on for the next 2 hours, but I know not everybody's like me. We'll start with King Charles, our namesake, king and martyr, and we'll try to get all the way through the Caroline Divines and see if I can get us to maybe the Oxford movement, and we'll stop there. That'll take us to the early 1800s, and we'll probably have one class after that, and we can jump into liturgy and theology. So thank you for coming. If you think of a question after you leave, you have my email. Just shoot me an email, text me, and God bless everyone, and thank you for listening to me.
Do you want to announce your email on the...
If you haven't, you can send my email is mkbrown7@bellsouth.net, or you can do it through the church email on the website. All right. Thank you, and God bless you, and have a great day.